In 1873, when the Modoc War happened, Captain Jack killed General Canby. That marked essentially the beginning of the end. It's important to give some context before the war in order to show why the Modoc War of 1873 was so important.
Boy, there are a lot of events that led up to the war. It just didn't happen overnight. You look back over a number of decades, there were quite a few events that occurred that kind of brought the parties to a head.
I believe the events that led up to the Modoc War was greed. Greed over the land that's here, and greed over lifestyle change, and lack of understanding between people.
It was all fought over a dirty four-letter word, land. It was land, you know, and everybody wanted this rich, beautiful land.
I think the driving cause was a group of people that banded together that wanted this land.
You have to realize that even though the Modoc War was fought in the lava beds with that craggy rock and everything, the homeland were the shores of Tule Lake and Lost River, lush, green, and beautiful.
But a lot of people don't understand today that this landscape wasn't always so barren. It was beautiful here. There was abundant fish, there was water, there were deer, there were birds to eat, because this land took care of us.
10 years before the Modoc War, it's a time in which there was an uneasy peace. Around 1868, Grant became President of the United States, and he inherited an unusual political situation, one in which the public tended to be humanitarian do-gooders, and they felt that the military was actually being too harsh on the Indians. And so when Grant became president, he decided to go the direction of the humanitarian do-gooders because they represented the citizens and the public.
You know, these Modocs, they were working, they were earning money, going to Wairika, spending their money, living as neighbors, collecting rent off of some of these ranchers.
Modocs were kind of learning things like rent when they were over in Wairika working for miners. So to them to have settlers come and live on their land, they should be able to charge them rent by taking a few head of cattle or things like that.
That different culture, so you know, maybe they would take a cow or go straight into a house without knocking, and that got on people's nerves.
But the biggest thing is just that clash of culture, having that new culture come in, not understanding the people who were here before, not respecting what's already theirs, and then that just building until they finally decide to bring the army in and try to have them settle it and decide who should be here.
There was a letter writing campaign, you know, to get the soldiers down here, to make them do something.
They then would write back because they were being told that they could come here, pick out whatever homesteads they want, no one would ever be around, no one would ever bother them.
People came into these countries feeling that they were better than inhabitants that they met.
And they start trying to push you back. They're scaring all your game off. You're feeding your kids, feeding your grandma, you're feeding your people with the food, the deer and the birds and the fish that are here and the plants that are here, and then you got people coming through making all this noise, scaring them off, shooting them all off, maybe taking more than what they need and threatening the survival of a people.
Our people was forced from this area to be put on the Klamath Reservation.
Just because people all have the same color hair and the same color skin does not mean that their cultures are the same, their religions are the same, or that they even get along. And there was a lot of conflict between the Klamaths and the Modocs. And the Klamaths began to harass the Modocs.
They also weren't getting the supplies that when they signed the treaty they were told that they would be getting.
They wasn't treated well when we was put at Modoc Point. And so our leaders at that time decided to bring our people back home.
So the Modocs went to Knapp, who was the Indian agent at Klamath Agency, and they said, hey, this has got to stop. This can't happen.
Their leaders and Captain Jack finally decided that they would try to move back to their homeland and negotiate for their own reservation in that area.
And our people wanted to just be here on this land that was theirs. And they came here with those intentions, and it didn't happen.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs gave the order to the military to come in and to move the Modocs back to the reservation by force if necessary.
The first battle of the Modoc War came about when there was an attack that was totally unauthorized. They sent too few soldiers from Fort Klamath down. It was just a disaster.
And so they were at their camp just outside of Merrill, Oregon on the Lost River. And when the Army approached, it was more Modocs than they expected. There was about 160 men, women, and children. And they didn't just say, okay, let's go.
And that started the Modoc War. But it was all a misunderstanding because one or two soldiers decided they wanted to do it without any authorizations.
Following that initial meeting, in a sense, at the Lost River, the Army then proceeded to retreat, and the Modocs retreated by canoe and landing themselves what's now considered to be Captain Jack's stronghold.
The first battle for the stronghold, there were 300 soldiers and again these 55 warriors.
And that's when the military really realizes that the tactics that they're using, which were Civil War tactics where you kind of line up in that straight line and you do a full frontal attack, won't work here.
And they just bamboozled those soldiers. When the soldiers attacked from the east and the west, and they were in Captain Jack's stronghold, a natural lava fortress, those soldiers thought they had it made. How could this little band of Modocs hold out? Well, I like to say it was guerrilla warfare, using the land against the enemy.
So they hid amongst the stronghold, and so when the Army lined up and just full frontal attacked it, it was like an open shooting range, which is why during that first battle, the Modocs saw no casualties whatsoever, and the military had dozens of casualties. So with that battle, they then brought in the peace commissioners, trying to see if they could end this in a peaceful way. General Canby was there as a peace commissioner, not as an actual general leading the soldiers.
Jack was, again, because they were never an actual tribe, they were just bands that came together in war. Jack was selected as their war chief. One very, very, very important thing about the Modoc culture is no decision was made without a consensus of the people. When the Peace Commission met and General Canby and Reverend Thomas were killed, that was done by vote of the people. In other words, the night before, they literally voted, do we kill the peace commissioners or do we go for peace? Captain Jack spoke for peace.
One thing with the Modocs is if their leader is killed, that usually will stop their battle. The thought was if they killed General Canby, that the military would then leave. Members of the tribe actually shamed Captain Jack into trying to murder General Canby.
So they took a woman's basketry cap and a woman's shawl and put them on Captain Jack. This essentially, and at least in this particular culture, in this particular tribe, was a very humiliating thing to do. He got the message and he agreed to shoot General Canby the next day.
That was it. There was no going back. That was a huge thing. E.R.S. Canby was the only general ever killed in war. The papers in this country, you can imagine, it was just the worst thing that ever happened. And the Modocs, from that moment on, there was no place to go. Once they did that, that was done. And for Jack, that sealed his fate.
The event itself drew more media than had ever been present at a Western war battle.
When you start to look at the older newspapers, some of them actually have a sympathetic view to the Modocs, and then that event immediately switched that view, and they started to refer to them more in the mindset of they're being savage.
To be such an extraordinary war, to have such a small group of Indians, native people, hold off such a large number, that alone is newsworthy.
The killing of General Canby allowed perception to change and allowed the American military to go ahead and get the Indians out of the way.
And so the killing of General Canby was truly, truly the beginning of the end.
One thing that had occurred when they did attack General Canby is they went in under a white flag. And there was incidences before the war with Ben Wright where he had approached the tribe under a white flag, a truce, and then had killed Modocs under that white flag.
I think it's important for people to remember Ben Wright and the white flag of truce when they talk about Captain Jack killing Canby under a flag of truce. You gotta remember that's already taken place before. You know, Captain Jack's dad was there. There was only 4 people that made it out. He brought them together for a feast. He tried to poison them. They didn't eat the meat, and then they all got shot down early in the morning. I do think that it gets a lot of the attention, and it probably has most of the reason why this place is a national monument, is because a general was killed. And so I don't like down there on that cross where it says that he was murdered. You know, he was killed. Murder makes us look bad. And it's out there for all the public to see.
The army immediately wanted to attack, but they knew at that point their tactics weren't going to work, and they cut the Modocs off from their water source.
The military did not think the Modocs could possibly get out of Captain Jack's stronghold. To the north was the river, to the south was no man's land that nobody could go, and there were huge numbers of troops to the east and to the west. The Modocs knew the land. They just walked right out of there one night and just totally astonished the army. They knew where the caves were that gave them water. So they were able to survive in the lava beds for a long time because they really understood those caves. But in time, hunger, they didn't have much water, the ice began to run out, and they were desperate. They were driven people. They had no place to go. When they realized that the end was coming, it went to a vote of the people. And the people voted to surrender. Captain Jack had in essence, in the military's eyes, he murdered a general. He did not have a life. If he was captured, he knew what would happen. So in the middle of the night, even though the people had voted to surrender, he took the best guns and horses and he left.
And then they went and tracked down Captain Jack for the army. Pretty much the same ones that made Captain Jack kill Canby were the ones that tracked him down.
They captured Jack on June 1st of 1873, and that ended the war. And he surrendered by saying, "Jack's legs give out."
Following the trial, they were convicted of murder. Boston Charlie, Black Jim, John Sconchin, and Captain Jack were all then hung the next morning, which was October 3rd of 1873.
Hanging that even the little kids were forced to watch their own family members die, hanging at the end of that rope.
Shortly thereafter, they took some 150 Modoc men, women, and children, and they put them into exile. They sent them by wagon from Fort Klamath down to Redding, California, and there they put them on a train.
Many died in the trip going all the way back there because it took quite a long time. And also they were getting there in the wintertime.
They were sparsely clothed. It was a horrendously rough trip, and they were on the train some 3 weeks back to Oklahoma Indian Territory, and there they started a new life. They were, it goes without saying, a very dispirited group of people. It must have been I can't even imagine how they must have felt. It was an amazing, amazing war. I think one of the most amazing Indian wars ever fought, and one of the least known, which is really a ridiculous situation.
So why would such an important event be forgotten?
The federal government doesn't, I would say at that time, they didn't want to glorify what they did, trying to get rid of a whole race of people. And now that race of people is still here. We didn't have the capability or at that time to be able to tell our own story, that it wasn't told like it should be told.
Well, the dominant society is the one that put these plaques up, and they're going to tell the story the way that they want to, kind of slant it a little bit.
So it's a pretty small one when you consider some of the other major ones that we teach more regularly in curriculum and stuff. But even professors that I've spoken to who teach Native American history, I bring up the Modocs and they're like, the who?
I became interested in the Modoc War because I have been teaching California Indians. And while teaching California Indians, I wondered why essentially they were given so little respect. And what I realized that the historical context of anthropology played a big role in attitudes towards California Indians, that essentially set a tone that California Indians represented a stage of development, which was primitive, uncivilized, and savage. The Modoc War and Captain Jack have been lost in history because it happened in California. So consequently, it was not romanticized. It did not have the same effect that some of these other wars or historical events had.
By the end of the 6-month war, you had over 1,000 soldiers involved in one way or another. And there were only, we'd place the number around 55, somewhere between 50 and 60, say 55 warriors. How could that happen?
You had to be a pretty formidable individual to survive here. And that's what the Modoc people were. We was industrious, and we knew and understood the landscape.
They understood the land, and they would tie sagebrush to their heads, creep through the crevices. They used camouflage. They just used the land. And of course, that's what Native people are all about, is understanding their land.
This land that we're here in now is the land of the Modocs, and it was chosen for our people by the Creator, Komokums. He created this area so that we could live here and dwell here, and we could take care of it. Our people are the caretakers of this land. And when we're not healthy, the land isn't healthy.
Well, we are the land. The land is us. I mean, you can't separate the two. I'm every bit of this land around me. I'm created from it. It's literally my DNA.
I don't know if it gives me a different perspective being a descendant. I just know that when I'm here, I can feel it.
This is my home. It's the most beautiful place in the world. It's a place that I'll live my life and I'll die here.
I don't know if Captain Jack specifically said, well, this is where we're going because this is a good place for war, because our people wasn't coming here for war. They were coming here to live.
Because he wasn't having to look out for just himself and his warriors. He also had his children and wives and elders with the group who they knew weren't going to be able to fight and weren't going to be on those front lines.
I think, for me, if I try to put myself back in those shoes, it would have been, maybe not the landscape as much as why I'm fighting and what's going to happen if I die. Their kids could be raped, or their wives could be raped, the men could be raped, there's just going to be there's no telling what's going to happen to the people once they die, so they can't die, they have to fight. I'll be willing to put myself out there and get shot down. If that meant giving a little bit of time for your wife and kids to get away. And I think there was a lot more bravery on the Modoc side than there was for the soldiers. Soldiers were just fighting for hardtack and bacon.
After reading some of the information of even some of the soldiers that didn't have an idea of why they was even here, I wouldn't say that all of them were good, because there was some that were sent here directly to eradicate the Modoc people, and that's what they were doing. And some of them did it maliciously, but there was good people on both sides.
I researched for a full 10 years everything I could read before I actually wrote my book. I entered writing that book as a Modoc. I exited that book as a human being, having tremendous empathy for the young soldiers who gave their lives not even knowing what they were doing there. It was just a tragedy for everybody. It really was. There was no right or wrong side, and there certainly were no victors. I think that Modoc people today, I think most of them have a real respect for what happened in the past.
I owe my life to that, and I recognize that gift that they gave allows me to be here today, and it's my job to protect that, so my grandchildren and their grandchildren can be here.
I see huge changes. I see a pride coming up now. I see an understanding of what happened.
That the Modoc stood up was always a source of pride for me, knowing that some of my blood that runs through my veins wasn't going to just bow down to the superior force.
You can look back at the past and say, should have, would have, I wish. Or you can say what happened, happened, and here we are.
In the words of the Modoc people, it's Howina, which is Howina, Howina, Winia. And those are Modoc words meaning I've changed.
That's what this song means, is now I've changed. If you're doing something you want to change, you can change.
War is an atrocity in any time, in any place, and the Modoc War is no exception.
If we let it die and we forget about it, it's easier to repeat it again.
We need to learn from it, and we need to grow from it.
And you have to really take a look at the significance of the Modoc War and what happened here, what happened with General Canby, and what happened to this people. And people now want to know true history.
And whether we think of it as a world war or a little war, even wars in our families and among ourselves, we have to realize how futile they are. And I think that's the great lesson.
Well, I guess if there's one lesson learned, it's they learned that they couldn't exterminate the Modocs.
I don't really know how to explain how you know when a creator has put you here to do something. And all that our people have went through, from being moved to the Klamath Reservation, to what happened to my ancestors that had to go and be shipped to Oklahoma, and to all the heartache and ugliness that they suffered there. All I know is that we're not dead, and I know that it just makes me proud to be who I am, and I know that a Creator created me for that.
This is who we are. It's the way it will always be. We're not going anywhere. Modocs have always been here. My bones of my ancestors are buried in these hills, and we're always going to be here.
We're here for a reason, and maybe this is that reason to tell the truth.
We'll be here for another 10,000 years. We've been here for 10,000 years already. We'll be here for another 10,000 years.
These are events that happened, that took place, that, you know, drove a band to say, nah, we can't live this way. We have to do something, and we'll die for it.